do you have a significant bridge experience that you remember? Do you remember a bridge that kind of stands out to you, a bridge that has stood out on your journey, or a bridge that has significant meaning for you in the midst of the chaos? For my family, it is this bridge. As you cross mainland Texas into South Padre, as you cross over onto the island, the smell of the ocean, the breeze filling the car, there's nothing like it for our family. This is our favorite bridge. It was actually during COVID we started traveling to Padre, and it has become this place of rejuvenation amidst the uncertainty. This bridge is the symbol of the path to peace for us. So many of you have also actually mentioned to me the rickety wood slab bridges of Madison County as standing out to you. There is this connection because you kind of feel like they're going to collapse, which is such a metaphor for our own relational bridge building. When is the relationship? When is the community precarious and we have to tread ever so softly together? Former pastor at Bozeman United Methodist Church, Dave McConnell, sent me this bridge. This is the Most Star Bridge, which was destroyed in the Bosnian War. And then it was rebuilt as a sign of hope for the world. That even when we destroy the bridge from another who is different from us so that they can't have the bridge, we can rebuild it. I know many of you know this bridge. If you have been to the Luckick Park United Methodist Camp, and if you've taken the hike from the camp all the way up to the falls, you know this bridge. It is such a symbol for our community of peace in the midst of chaotic lives. And a couple weeks ago, Fred Cornelius sent me this one. This is a bridge where only one person can walk at a time. And I think today it's a great metaphor for this sermon, because sometimes we don't get to walk on the bridge with others. Sometimes we're the ones holding back and we can only go single file. Sometimes in the midst of bridge building, there is such conflict that we can't walk out together. It's a great metaphor for our conversation about how we stay on this bridge. Well, one bridge for me that I think about is Peter Brown. Peter has played the piano here at Bozeman United Methodist Church for years and is retiring in April, both from his regular job and from his piano job, to travel the country. You probably haven't seen Peter's as much, Peter's spouse, Carrie, who is socially distancing after cancer treatment to remain healthy. But Peter is also the chair of the Board of Trustees here at BUMC. Over the years, Peter and I have had many conversations, recognizing the ways that we are different from one another and the same as one another. And today's sermon and the videos from Peter are really an exploration of how we remain on this bridge that we are on together. Well, in our sermon series last week, we left the sermon with disagreeing parties on the bridge, right? There was uncertainty about how to move forward when we are in such conflict that we won't let the other pass beside us. Maybe there's such distance also that we can't cross it. The space is just too big and too uncertain. Maybe we're walking one at a time because that's all we can handle right now. But our world, especially our online world, does not give us space to build bridges because this world thrives on keeping us apart. Christian writer and commentator Carrie Nieuwhof identifies that online presence, social media presence, wants to tear the bridge down. We're more aggressive online. Hate generates more clicks than love does, and anger can get you heard even when you have absolutely nothing to say. We live in a world that is focused on sound bites. It's meant to polarize people and set us apart. Our world is so much about an us and a them mentality. Hear this video from Peter.
Yeah, labels are unfortunate. Labels are what allow people with minimal thought to divide into camps quickly. And that's unfortunate. Anti-racism is certainly such a loaded term today. Don't capitalize it for a moment. Just racism and against it. By that, the term anti-racism is wonderful. We are all God's children, no matter what the color of our skin or any other differences among us, and should treat each other in that way.
Very beginning, right?
It's so fundamental, I have to believe it's in our DNA. I trust that the theory of evolution is a reasonable description of how we got here, and we still share whatever the number is, 98% of our DNA with chimpanzees, and chimpanzees in the forest, this troop versus this troop decide they are other from each other, and they will actually go to war with one another. You and I couldn't tell them apart, but they can tell them apart. Right. So yes, are we tribal in nature? Do we instinctively divide into an us versus them? I think that's in our human DNA, and we need to overcome those things in our human DNA that are destructive and not.
So Peter's really talking about the tribalism of our world, the ways we label and other each other. Which all this means is that the bridge building work of relationships and community is actually incredibly hard work to engage in. And these labels lead us to separate ourselves tribally, regionally, religiously, ethnically, culturally. Here another video from Peter.
It's hard to verbalize any of that these days with 2 years of not physically being present. And we're not physically present yet. Some people are, but with Carrie's situation, we're not yet. And so kind of hard to remember what that means. I played at church today, which means that I was physically here, and then we're recording this afterwards, which means that I stayed afterwards until everybody left. And that's the first time in literally years that I've done that. And so the whole means of talking to people afterwards, I almost had to relearn that skill today. So everything in our world is different post-pandemic, and it's going to take a long time, more than a month or two, to get back to regular life again.
See, it isn't just difficult because of our own DNA. We're having actually to learn how to be in relationships post-COVID all over again. How to stay after church, why it matters to stay after church and engage with one another. And it means you have to decide, are you in or not? And if you are, then what do you need to be in through the whole walk across the bridge? What do you need to make it onto the other side? When most of the world is not there and most of the world's not willing to stand on the bridge. We have to be a people who are countering this narrative of isolation and disconnection and otherness. If we are going to be these radical bridge builders in a world that wants something different, then we have to begin actually right here. We have to focus on the ways we need to cross this aisle before us, to cross our own community. And I think that begins with Paul's letter to the people living in Corinth. Now, you know this passage. You have heard it dozens of times because it is the most often read passage at weddings, which drives me bonkers because Paul didn't write it about eros love between two partners. In fact, Paul would have said, that was kind of a folly because in Paul's mind, Jesus is coming back really soon, so that really doesn't matter. This is about the love we have in a community together. If I speak in tongues of human beings and of angels, but I don't have love, I'm a clanging gong or a clashing cymbal. I just want to pause right there. That's what we get from media, social media, right? The clanging gong and the crashing cymbal, the love is missing. It's a little bit of a generalization, I get that, but for the most part, it is true to my experience that the online community is all about making noise. Paul continues, if you have the gift of prophecy, and I know all the mysteries and everything else, and if I have such complete faith that I can move mountains, but I don't have love, I am nothing. For love is patient Love is kind. It isn't jealous. It doesn't brag. It isn't arrogant. It isn't rude. It doesn't seek its own advantage. It isn't irritable. It does not keep a record of complaints. It is not happy with injustice, but it is happy with the truth. Love puts up with things, trusts in all things, hopes for all things, endures all things. God's love never fails. When we can't walk out onto the bridge, when we can't offer forgiveness, when we can't see the belovedness of the other person standing on the other side, remember, we are commanded by God to love everyone. And can that love drive us to this bridge? Can that love keep us on this bridge? I want you to hear from Peter the power of the Thursday men's group that has met for about a dozen years now, and how it maintains the love of God between God's people.
Well, it's been interesting. It's been a group now for, it's got to be getting somewhere close to 10 years, probably 7, 8, 9 years, something like that. With at least some of us have been part of it the entire time. There's been people that have come and gone, and we have new people. Even just this last week, there were a couple of people that I hadn't seen before, so that's great. Mostly it's a matter of, it's a place to talk about things that you don't get to talk about in regular life. In our regular day-to-day life, we don't sit down and talk about books. We certainly don't sit down and talk about books that have anything to do with faith and religion. And I can only think of a couple of friends that I have outside of church that I would ever use the phrase, "You and I are both men of faith." Mm-hmm. We live in a secular world. Like it or not, we live in a secular world. And so to have a place where you don't feel any need to hide the fact that you are in fact a person of faith, that you can be open about that, is a privilege. Well, we very purposely, I mean, you're hinting but not saying, we very purposely never do get to politics. There have been a time or two when someone, particularly someone new to the group, has started going that direction, and nope, not going there. That gets cut off. Because that's not the purpose of the group, is to discuss politics. And discussing politics is really difficult to do. You and I do, personally, but we do that as a one-on-one basis. Discussing politics in a group setting, it is just simply not possible to have the same degree of personal intimacy with your audience as it is in a one-on-one conversation. And therefore, even in a group of perhaps 6 to 10 people, like the men's group might be on a given day, it's too easy, if anything of a political nature gets said, it's too easy to start dividing up into camps because there isn't that same level of intimacy. You hear a word, you hear a catchphrase, you hear a term that has a loaded definition, and that immediately divides people into camps.
Historically.
Well, I think it's fair to say that most of us in the group couldn't articulate a coherent theology. It's not who we are. We're not divinity students. Some of us have read more than others about in that subject matter, but most of us are just willing to hear what anyone has to say, because we don't, even though we are men of faith, we don't necessarily spend 5 days a week thinking about things from a theological standpoint. And so if somebody brings up anything that has more of a grounding in theology, as the books that we're reading would lead us that direction, what will happen around the table is, well, that's interesting. Gee, I'm glad you brought that up. I don't remember ever a time saying, like, what on earth are you talking about? That's never been the reaction. It's always been just the fact that something got brought up that has a bit of substance to it in a theological direction causes people to say, well, that was really interesting. Thank you for that. That's about as far as it goes.
I just find something powerful about breaking bread together and staying connected around the table. This is a central core identity of Methodists across the valley. that we come to this table, to this bridge, that we stay here together, and it is God's love that keeps us connected. Peter ends his thoughts by reflecting on the ways he chooses to stay at the table.
Well, I won't say that I'm necessarily all that good at it, and I didn't grow up that way. I grew up totally in white, normal society. I grew up on Beaver Cleaver Street, and that was the world I knew. I'll never forget when I was 14 years old, we were living in Denver at the time, and I went on a backpacking trip with a group of a dozen or so boys my age and a couple of men leading, and one of the boys on the trip happened to be black. First black person I had ever spent a week around. And it didn't matter to me, I didn't care, but just even the fact that, when he took his shirt off to go take a dunk in the lake, yeah, his chest is black too. I'd never seen a black chest before, just because that wasn't the people that I knew. And so we notice these things, we notice these differences. And you asked, how did I come about it? Well, to be honest, I grew up, and I come from a stable and loving family, and I won't say that my parents were without prejudice. We all have prejudices, to whatever extent, and they're a generation older than I am. But I guess I didn't grow up in a bigoted family. As it happens, also in Denver, when I was 16, for the first time, a black family moved in next door to us. In what, as I say, is prior to that, totally lily white Denver suburb. The neighbors across the street, who had been best friends with people who sold the house, immediately closed their curtains and never opened them again, so they wouldn't have to either associate with the neighbors who had now committed this terrible sin in their eyes of selling to a black person, as well as, of course, never wanting to see the people who lived there. And it was next door to us. And they moved in, and we made friends. I was 15 or 16. They had a boy who was 8, Sean, and I took Sean fishing at the lake across the street. They simply happened to be our neighbors, and that was a good experience for me we can have black neighbors. It just means that we have neighbors who look different than I do. But even much more recently than that, an influence on me has been my kids. As you said this morning, they're a different generation, and boy, are they a different generation. My youngest in particular, who's in New York City, music school, and now a musician in New York City, has a completely multi-ethnic set of friends. People of all kinds of diversity, whether it's their sexual life or their race or their immigrants from wherever, whole range of people. And he's told me some things that I never had reason to think about before. One of his friends that I met, who again is a young black man, other than the fact that he has skin that's darker than my son, they could be interchangeable with each other. They both, put their instruments on their back and get on the subway and go do what they do. We'll never get stopped by police. The other fellow gets stopped by police regularly. Okay, well there is a piece of lived reality, as the term goes, that I don't know about. Will told me that a couple years ago, and it has stuck with me.
Reality is we have to stay open to the journey and on the bridge of discovery. And there, curiosity, humility, vulnerability are the traits that will keep us on the bridge if we choose to stay here. The reality is others will walk away from this bridge.
And let's be honest, we haven't been 100% successful at that. People have walked away from our table.
Right, they have. Right, and they're always welcome back. I mean, I want to always maintain that. Like, if you left the table, you're always welcome to be back at the table. It doesn't mean you have to not be here.
We'll put that in the small likelihood of actually happening. I mean, once you've walked away, you don't come back generally. But
sure. That
requires swallowing pride, and people don't like that dish.
This is true, and it is difficult. The journey on the bridge is about being open to the other, no matter who comes and goes, no matter our disagreements, no matter our conflicts. We still come to the bridge. And sometimes others won't meet us here. We can't control that. We can only be responsible for getting ourselves to this bridge, choosing to stay here. We have to make that choice to be engaged and on the journey. Peter's on the bridge. Robin's on the bridge. Sue is on the bridge. Court is on the bridge. I am on the bridge. You are on the bridge as well. Some days, it's really all we can do is to step up, stand on the bridge, and rest in God's love that is patient and kind and never failing. Amen.